was going to do that, and I forgot to do it. All right. So he strings the life of Joseph through all of this, and we look at it from where he gets his dream from the Lord, his vision from the Lord, and he shares it with his family all the way up until he's in Egypt, and he's serving under Potiphar, and he's there, and he's working with them. So we understand that that Joseph had struggles. It wasn't always easy for him, but he was also under the leadership. I never really thought of Joseph as a second chair leader. I thought of him as a leader. But if you look at his life as he's serving with Potiphar there, that he's serving in that subordinate role while he's in his house. And we see kind of the things that he does. And we'll point those out as we go along too. So I'm skipping over to the second section now. It says, I'm a second chair leader, which is chapter 2 of the book. Or am I a second chair leader, I guess. What I want to ask you real quick is thinking about your roles. You can just take a moment yourself just to think about it. Thinking about your role you're in. Think about what you're doing, how you serve, who you serve with, who you serve under. Would you consider your role a second chair position? Would you say that maybe in one area you are, in one area you're not? Maybe in church you are, and in your business you're not, or maybe it's the other way around. But would you consider yourself serving in any type of second chair position? So you don't have to answer that unless somebody have something they want to say. No, okay. You don't have to answer that out loud if you don't want to. I just wanted you to think about it, consider it as we move forward. He says that the key to leading in a subordinate role is identifying and understanding opportunities to cultivate influence each and every day. So here is how, in a second chair position, you earn the respect and the influence that a first chair is given or a senior pastor is given by the position. In the second chair position, you do it by building relationships and influence. He says, identifying and understanding opportunities to cultivate influence each and every day. That you understand that there are opportunities that I can influence people, things that come up in life, situations in life where you step up and you lead, and you don't do it outside of your bounds, outside of your realm. You don't go over somebody's head to do it, but that you're looking for those opportunities. You're specifically understanding that, there are going to be times that come up where I can have influence in my position. And as you do that, and as you're consistent in that, that's how you develop that respect. That's how you develop that influence and that authority in your church or with your people while serving in that second chair role. So I'm going to throw up one more slide here for you. John Maxwell says that leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. I love that quote from him. He puts a lot of quotes in here, but I just kind of shared some of the ones that really stood out to me. The leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. When I thought of leadership, that's not the first thing that came to my mind. Think of a lot of different areas, and a lot of different things, but the truth in that's powerful and it's simple, that people will follow you if you're influencing them, right? That's why if you are on Instagram or Facebook, or it's not necessarily on Facebook that much, but especially on Instagram or multiple social media, we have influencers now. We have people that are on there that people use to promote their products and advertise for them on social media. And their sole reason they get them to do that is because they're influencers. People follow them, right? They have a lot of followers because of the influence that they have. And so you may pay somebody to advertise your product just because they got a famous face and people will follow them, and kids will watch it, or adults will watch it, and they'll buy that stuff just because that person's saying that they use it. That's influence, right? That's leadership. Now, whether that's good leadership or bad leadership depends on, I guess, who the person is that's doing it. Some of the influencers I've seen I'm not too fond of, but I think there might be some good ones out there. I don't want to group everybody into being bad. But that's what leadership is. It's just influence, being able to influence people, and you're going to influence them one way or another. You can do it for the Lord, you can do it for the world, but we're influencing people. And if you don't have influence and you're not leading, and you don't build influence unless you're taking advantage of those opportunities that you have along the way. It's built day by day. It doesn't come overnight. I also saw where you can pay these companies to basically they create a whole bunch of fake accounts on like Instagram and Facebook, and it gives you a whole bunch of followers immediately. But they're all fake accounts. You're not really leading anybody, and it's the image, it's the illusion of influence. And when people see that, they want to follow it too, and maybe you can build something off of that. But Are you really influencing people, or is it just an illusion of that? Do you just tell yourself that you're influencing, that people are following you, or are they really following you? And it's a question that I need to ask myself at times, and I want to challenge you to ask yourself as well. He says, one reality is the influence is harder to obtain for second chairs than it is for first chairs, mainly because preaching weekly sermons, guiding congregation-wide decisions, and participating in key leadership groups gives a senior pastor high visibility. Talked about that earlier. That's the reason they have it's faster. The influence is built faster. They're in front of people more often. As a second chair, you may have an opportunity to do that. I think Miss Rosa, you said, was it the fifth Sundays or the fourth Sundays that you have an opportunity to speak? So, and usually for me, I'll speak to the youth every week, but in the main congregation, it's, just every so often that I have an opportunity to preach from the main pulpit. So you don't have that in front of everybody visibility in that way all the time. So you got to take advantages of the opportunities that you do have personally in building those relationships with one another. And one of the beautiful things is that as a second chair leader, usually building the one-on-one relationships is easier than it is for a senior pastor, because most of the time people are intimidated by a senior pastor and they don't feel like they can have that one-on-one relationship where you and I or anybody serving in a second chair role, oftentimes that's a little bit easier. We're a little bit more approachable usually. Just because it takes longer, however, does not mean that influence building is less important for a second chair leader. How much credibility do you have with the people who are affected by your ministry? Do they see you as someone they trust at a deep level? This includes your senior leader, volunteer workers, fellow staff members, people in your congregation, and those you're trying to reach. Without credibility and trust in their eyes, you will not have influence. Building credibility requires patience, consistency, and persistence. It requires a spirit of teamwork and cooperation. You're not competing with your senior leader or the others on your team. Seeing them as competitors is a dead-end road. Being credible or building credibility and influence requires putting the prestige of your position aside and picking up the towel of service. You must commit to serving your entire organization well each and every day. Then and only then will your peers, subordinates, and senior leaders truly allow you to lead from the second chair. That service, an attitude of service, an attitude of being a servant is the most important thing you can do to build credibility and influence in your congregation and with the people that you serve with, and including your senior leader, your senior pastor, whoever it is that's in charge. Service, an attitude of service goes a long way. It shows that you're there for the right reasons. It shows that you're there for the well-being of the church, not just for ourselves. Again, he said that, it's okay to want to move forward it's not okay not to want to stay in a second chair role forever. But if people understand and what they get from you is that you're trying to advance and you're doing everything to promote yourself, that's not an attitude of service. And people see that. They see through the facade of whatever we're trying to put forward, and they see our real motives. And nobody wants to follow somebody that's doing stuff for themselves all the time. But they will follow somebody who's willing to serve and who's trying to serve. So he takes a minute and he unpacks this definition of what it means to be a subordinate leader. So unpacking the definition, the first word is a subordinate. He says a subordinate, even the most gifted or capable second chair, is still under the leadership and authority of another leader. So no matter who you are, no matter how gifted you are, no matter how talented you may be, if you're in a second chair role, you're still under the authority of somebody else, of another leader, of your senior pastor. And it's okay. And that's good. But you need to remember that. We need to understand that, hey, we're still accountable to somebody. We're still under authority of somebody. And he says, how well are you doing under someone else's authority? How well are you doing under someone else's authority? So sometimes being under authority doesn't come as easy for some people as it does for others. And it really just kind of depends most of the time on how you view authority. Maybe the interactions you've had with authority in your life. Sometimes we view authority as something that's negative or bad, and that can help cause a strained relationship in it. Sometimes we view it as something good, and we try, and we're okay with serving under it, but the people who are over us don't view it that same way, and it makes it difficult. But how well are you doing under someone's authority right now? So a subordinate who's influenced, the second part, who's influenced. Influence is evident in people's readiness to follow you and their desire to include you in key decisions and initiatives. So if you're wondering if you're having influence on people, then if you can measure that sometimes by the fact if they're coming to ask you questions about decisions that need to be made. If they're coming to you for that reason, that means they understand that you have influence and they want to be involved in that. It's, are you becoming a person with significant influence? So the definition of subordinate, whose influence, next part is with others. I started this because to me, this is probably one of the biggest things that somebody taught me about leadership early on. He relays it in this book, just 3 words. It says, leadership is relational. Leadership is relational. I'm saving that little quote for myself. I might put it up in my office. Leadership is relational. You got to have a relationship with people to lead people. That, to me, that's one of the most important things. He said, how would you rate your relationships with others in your area of responsibility? Sometimes we speak, maybe you're somebody who speaks their mind, and that's okay. It's okay to be open and to say what's on your mind, but you can also do that in love. And sometimes it doesn't help anybody to just be quiet about every situation. So you need to talk, you need to speak up, but make sure that you're building a relationship with people and not just running over people on the way. So a subordinate whose influence with others adds value. Is the church or ministry you serve better because of your influence? That's a tough question to ask ourselves. That's a tough question for me to ask myself. That if you sit back and listen and evaluate your ministry and what's taking place around you, is the church or ministry you serve better because of your influence? So challenge you to ask yourself that, look at it. And he says, do you stop what you're doing to add value and help others? You stop what you're doing to add value and help other people. And then he says, adds value, and the last part is throughout the organization. Second chairs who are committed to cultivating influence and adding value have the opportunity to make the entire organization better. So you have a unique opportunity to influence not only your area of ministry that you're serving in, but you have an opportunity to make the entire organization better if you're striving to be this type of second chair leader, so a subordinate whose influence with others adds value throughout the organization. You're working on those things. You're building relationships with your entire congregation, with your entire group of people that you're around weekly or daily, however often it is now. If you're building that influence, you have the opportunity to change the entire organization, not just your youth ministry or outreach ministry or music ministry or whatever it may be. Second chair leaders can be found in any organization. Some have titles that clearly indicate their role, but many do not. 2 titles that are often associated with second chair leadership in a multi-staff church are executive pastor and associate pastor. Probably those are the 2 we've heard the most. And sometimes we think that, if we don't have one of those 2 roles, then maybe we're not serving in that second chair leadership. But, again, as I told you earlier, that what he kind of clearly defines is that you don't have to have a title. You don't have to have a position, or even if you do, it doesn't have to be one of those 2. It can be anything in the church. If you're serving under your pastor, you have the opportunity to be a second chair leader within your church and your organization. The person's position may be a platform from which to lead, but a title is not what makes someone an effective second chair leader. The title doesn't, just because you became a second chair leader by title doesn't make you a second chair leader. Just because you became a pastor by title doesn't make you a pastoral leader. It does make you the pastor of your church. It doesn't mean that you're a good leader automatically. You have to grow. You have to change with that. So then he goes back and he talks about Joseph again. He says, and if you're following along, it's on page 19 in the book. So Joseph found himself in a place where he had to make a choice. The initial set of circumstances that pointed toward a great future had vanished. Joseph was there. Joseph had shared his dream with his brothers. They didn't appreciate that dream because they didn't want to have to bow down to him and serve him. They didn't like that. They threw him in the pit. We all know what happened. And Joseph has an opportunity as he arrives at Potiphar's house to choose to continue to serve and be obedient to the Lord, or to just throw it all away and walk away from it. But we know that what Joseph does is he begins to serve his new authority. Right? He becomes obedient. They find out that he's got this gift from God, that God's speaking and using him, and Potiphar wants him to, and ends up making him his right-hand man. And Joseph really, which is interesting because we don't think of Potiphar as being somebody who was a very godly person, which he wasn't. But Joseph is obedient to him. Joseph serves him. He helps him follow through on what he wants to do, not forsaking his beliefs by any means or going against God at all, but he is obedient in serving his authority in his life at that moment. And it's the reason that they get to the point that they're in. Let's see, got another one here. So there are four specific choices a second chair leader needs to make. It's on page 20 in your book. Choice one is to put on leadership lenses. He says this is the perspective you have as you look at a given situation and try to see an issue as your first chair would see it, keeping the overall needs of the organization in mind. So to have on leadership lenses means that you don't just look at the decisions you make based off of your own area of ministry. You know, one of the popular ones is that we want to change the music, right? That we want to do something different with the music in church. And putting on leadership lenses means that you're looking at that decision based off of how it's going to affect the entire church, not just one area. Or in the youth group, for me, that we want to do something different in the youth. And sometimes we think that just because I make the decision in youth, that's all that's going to matter. Well, it's going to have a ripple effect on everything. We just need to look at big picture ideas and how it's going to play out that way. Choice number two is maximize on major opportunities. He says that certain things have to be done week in and week out to keep the organization moving forward. Less frequently, you have unique opportunities to do something that stretches you as a leader and that can have tremendous benefit for your congregation. So there are those opportunities you have to have influence and to make a big impact in your congregation, in your church. And you just need to be prepared to maximize on those. Prepare yourself, be ready for it. That comes with building credibility along the way, building relationship along the way so that people trust you. But then when those opportunities do come, that we maximize on those. Number three was don't back down from the right decision. Because sometimes a major leadership opportunity comes our way and we're tempted to run. The choice that a second chair must make is to pray first for God's wisdom and then to make the right decision, even if it's not easy. So sometimes in church, in ministry, you're going to be given opportunities that are scary. You're going to be given chances to do things or to make decisions that are not easy. And usually it's easier to pass the buck and to say, I'll let somebody else do it, let my pastor handle it, whatever it may be. And you do need to make sure that if it's something your pastor needs to know about or needs to handle, that you do that. It's not saying to go over his head, but what it is saying is don't back down just because you're scared of things. The most important thing is you can do is take it to God and make sure that's something you need to be doing. But if the Lord's telling you, yeah, you need to do it, then don't back down from it just because you're scared. You're in that leadership role. This is a time where you develop influence right here. These are those opportunities that can change things and that help people see you as that leader that you're called to be. So just make sure that you don't back down from something just because you're scared. Don't back down. He is specific to say from the right decision now. There's a lot of us that don't back down from the wrong decision, including me. There's been plenty of times where me and my wife have been arguing and I've been wrong and I wasn't backing down from it just because I wanted to be right. That's not the right decision. So make sure you're doing it for the right reason. Make sure you lay that thing before God and let him speak to you first. And then the fourth choice he says is to decide to thrive. This was an interesting one to me. He said, some people thrive in the second chair, others only survive. The latter are constantly looking for a ticket to something better, a new set of duties, a better group of people to lead, a new boss. Those who thrive do so even in difficult circumstances. The difference in focus of this final choice is simply attitude. That your attitude will determine whether or not you thrive or you're just surviving in the church or in your role. You can choose to do that. There's sometimes we like to blame it on a lot of different things, on the situation that we're in, on other people that are around us that aren't wanting to cooperate with what we're doing. I can't thrive in this ministry because it's just a dead end. Nobody wants to go anywhere. Nobody wants to do anything. But the decision of whether to just get by and survive in ministry or to thrive in it is completely based off of your attitude. It's your choice of attitude. It's my choice of attitude. And I don't always choose the right attitude for things. So just because I'm relaying this information with you, I don't want you to think that it's something that I've mastered that I'm doing, because I don't. I catch myself oftentimes thinking, man, if this would be different, we could do something a lot better. And but the choice to thrive in ministry is based off of our attitudes. How do you approach it? How do you come into the situation? And he's very adamant throughout the book about saying that we got to understand that a lot of the things we can, or in ministry, a lot of things that will make ministry better for us and help make our roles better and moving forward is that we understand that there are some things we can't control And if you can't control it, that's fine. You know, there's nothing you can do about that. But there are a lot of things you can control, and it's based off of your choice and what you're going to do and how you see it and how you perceive that situation. So you need to focus on the things that you can control and choose to have a positive attitude about them. Choose to do them right. So the attitudes, he says, there are a few different attitudes here. I think maybe I have those on here. Let me see. Yep. So decide to thrive. The 4 attitudes, he says, or you can have, the first one you need to have is an attitude of submission. He says an essential attitude in the second chair is submission. This is recognition of the authority God has placed over your life. It calls you to submit willingly to that authority. And if you struggle with submitting to authority, then I want to encourage you to lay that before the Lord, because we're all submitting to him. That's our goal. And if you can't submit to somebody, you can't submit to the authority that God's placed in your life, then that comes back to a relationship with him. That comes back to the beginning relationship, which is submitting to the Lord, submitting our lives to him. So lay that before him and let him help you work through that thing. I've come across a lot of people in ministry and youth ministry, especially teenagers, especially that do not like to submit to authority, and that would tell you they're not going to submit to any kind of authority. But it comes back to a relationship with God, because when God shows you that he's in control of your life, it'll change your attitude to that, and it'll help you a lot. And now you got to submit to the right authority too. So don't just do it to everybody. He said the second one is the related attitude is that of service. That you want to have a servant's heart. We talked about that earlier. The third one is an attitude of thankfulness. Anybody have anything you want to say? All right. So are you thankful for your church, your senior leader, and the opportunities you have to serve and lead? Second chairs need to be thankful in all circumstances. We know that that's in the Bible. The final attitude is an attitude of passion. And I started this comment too. He says you can have the other 3 attitudes. You can have the attitudes of submission, service, and thankfulness, and be a good second chair leader. You can, as long as you do those things, you can be a good second chair leader. But he says an attitude of passion distinguishes you as one of the best. It's the passion part that makes you different and sets you apart from every other second chair leader. Are you doing what you're doing to the best of your ability? Are you doing it with passion behind it? Are you doing it because you love it and your heart's in it, because your life's in it? Or are you just doing it to get by and get to the next step, or just to get through life? Most of us, especially if you're in a volunteer position, I hope you're not just doing it to kill time, because that's a lot of time that you could be doing something else. I don't think any of us would have just went into that and put ourselves through it just to get by, just to have something else to do. So I know that we all are in it for the right reason, but just make sure that you continue to do it with passion. Philippians 2, verse 5 says you must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. You got to have the same attitude as Jesus. And if you have the same attitude as him, then everything you do is going to have passion behind it, because he did it all the right way. I got it. Example. All right, so what I'm going to do real quick, that's the end of that first section. I'm trying to get through this thing. What I'm going to do is I want to give you 5 minutes. I'm going to split us up into some smaller groups. You'll see your screen. It'll break you up into a smaller group. And I just want you to discuss together this first paradox, or not the first paradox. I want us to discuss together this idea of being a subordinate leader, the attitudes. Just discuss what do you feel like is easy for you? What are some areas that you feel like you struggle in? Just take an opportunity to be honest with each other. Just kind of vocalize those things. I don't think any of us work in the same church, so you don't have to be specific about, but please don't be specific about people in your church or issues, but you can talk about personally, what are you struggling with, what's easy for you, that kind of thing. So let's do it like this. You'll see yourself getting shot out here in just 1 second. Let me change the time. All right, here we go. They put you in the room there, Justin? Oh, Justin's in there. There we go. Mr. Bill, it's going to get, Miss Shannon, it's going to get you there in just a second. It's taking it a minute. Let's see if I can get you in there. Just me and you, Mr. Bill.
Okay.
Let's go. Let's go to shoot you into a room. It's got you aside. I don't know why it takes so long sometimes. How's things going at your church? Me and you just have our own.
Going good. Going good. Yeah. I like this here drive in, but I'd rather be close and personal. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
like to be able to shake somebody's hand or hug somebody's neck.
Yes, sir. I completely understand that.
But I guess we got to abide the law, you know, the law's land while this is going on.
That's right. That's right. I don't know what's let's see if it'll. Some reason this does not want to stay in me.
Is it something on my end that I need to do?
I don't think so. I thought it does it. Is it asking you anything anywhere?
No, it's just got me in the center up top, and it's got you full video.
Let me see. Yeah, it usually just.
I see a little dot.
What's that thing? What's your dot say there?
It's just blinking red and off, and then.
See if it was something on my end there too, but it's not. It doesn't appear to be. Let's see what it is. Maybe we'll get it. Maybe we'll get it moved out there. I'll do some research on it before we get into the. Let me see. Let's see what this is. I don't know. What I'll do is I'm gonna try something real quick. Let me see what happens.
Probably, I mean, I'm in an Assembly of God church, and that's probably one of the biggest things. It's like I know what I'm called to do. I know what my giftings and callings are, but at the same time, when you're in a situation where you know, I've got, just for instance, my pastor, his family, most of them share this similar.
I don't know, Mr. Bill. It won't. I don't know what's going on with that.
Yeah.
But that's all right. What anything stand out to you so far? Anything in particular pique your interest?
Nah, you know, I enjoy what I do. And I agree on everything that you say, you know, about that second chair, because I feel like, you know, I am in the second chair, or I mean, that's the way I feel, because I'm so active in church, and I think everything. I mean, I love it. Sometimes I feel like I get overwhelmed, but other than that.
Now, hey, I know I can definitely agree with you on the getting overwhelmed at times, so especially right now.
Yeah.
It can get tough at times. A lot of stuff come at you at one time. Feel like you got a lot going on. Burn the candle at both ends. I'm sure, especially working a full-time job on top of it too. How long you been doing? Yeah. How long you been doing the music ministry there?
Well, I do. I'm this music, but I'm the well. I took over the position of song leader.
Yes, sir.
We lost one, and the pastor, he was so, I guess I felt like he was so overwhelmed with everything else that I just jumped in. I can't sing worth the lick, but I can't even carry a tune in a bucket. But, just that give him a little help, a little break.
I understand. Well, that goes back to that. Sometimes we don't get asked to do stuff just because we're the best, right? But sometimes we're willing.
That's right.
If you're willing, the Lord will use you, man. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Trust me, I love to sing.
I see people.
Go ahead. I would say
I don't know if I'm in the room or not. I see more people.
Yeah. Everybody's coming back on now. I just did it for a little while. Thomas is driving down the road, talking to us. Be careful, Thomas. Yeah, I love to sing, but I can't sing a lick either. So
I can't carry a tune in the bucket, but
it's a curse to love to sing so much and then not be able to. So, oh well. All right, we'll jump right back into this next part here. So we're getting into the first paradox. The first one's that subordinate leader. Everybody good? Got any questions? All right. We said the subordinate leader. I think we got everybody back, right? Yeah. We said the subordinate leader paradox is challenging to successfully balance because it is relationally intensive and partially dependent on another person, your first chair. So to be a good subordinate is partially dependent not all dependent just on what you can do and your attitude and all of that. It's actually partially dependent on your leader, right? So it's difficult to be a good subordinate if your leader. If he is a great leader, then it makes it easier to do that and fall in that position. But that's part of the paradox of being a subordinate and a leader too. So the second chair leader's most valuable tool for promoting change is his or her own attitudes and actions, which is what we've been talking about. This does not mean that the second chair is to be a mindless robot obeying whatever commands the first chair issues. Second chairs are leaders. This is the tension of the paradox. It's not easy to be a subordinate and a leader. And he talks about how Joseph did that in his life and how Joseph, as he was serving under Potiphar, he was there being a subordinate. But we also, again, because my first thought of Joseph is being a leader, not a subordinate. Obviously, he balanced those two very well and worked through that and was able to be a leader in the midst of his position there in Potiphar's house. So in chapter 3, take it from the top. He says, do you feel effective in your current role as a second chair leader? Whether you answer yes or no, your relationship with your first chair is a key part of the response. This is why anyone who aspires to realize full potential as a second chair leader must start at the top. And he says the top relationship, that is. But if you want to be a good second chair leader, if you aspire to reach your full potential, it's got to start with your relationship with your first chair. If that's your dad, then good luck, because that's a tough relationship to have to work through. But it starts with that relationship. So if you don't have a relationship with that person at all yet, or if it's not good, I want to encourage you to begin to focus on that and begin to work on that relationship with your senior pastor, whoever the leader is, even if it's in the business life. Begin to work on that relationship. Begin to build it. You can't control what they do. Again, he says, don't worry about the things you can't control. If you focus on that, you're going to drive yourself crazy, make yourself upset, get depressed about situations. You can't control what they're going to do, but you can control you. And if it means you being the bigger person and stepping in and initiating that relationship, then I want to encourage you to do it. Be the bigger person. Be somebody who mends bridges and not burns them. Be somebody who restores the grudge and not keeps it going. If there's been some hurt there, I mean, I know over years in church things happen, things come up, and it's not always easy. And man, people get hurt feelings, and I've been down that road before, and I know how it can be. And church should be the best place ever, but it can also be a hurtful place at times in church life. Just that comes from the imperfectness of people, right? It's because we're not all perfect and we don't all have it together and we don't have everything figured out. But the hurt is real and it's there at times. But as a second chair leader, be the person who initiates and to begin to restore that relationship if it's not a good relationship with your first chair. And if it is good, continue to work on it. Continue to let it grow. He says he considers the partnership between senior pastor and executive pastor to be similar to a marriage. A harmonious relationship is never guaranteed. It takes effort to make it work. So just like a marriage, just because you got married doesn't mean everything is going to be perfect, right? Those that are married can understand. Those that are not yet, heads up. Just because you got married don't mean everything gets perfect all of a sudden. When you move in, it's not all sunshine and rainbows always. It takes work, right? It takes sacrifice. It takes putting in the effort. And that's the same way with your relationship with your first chair. It's going to take work. Just because you got hired into that position or came in or they got hired in and brought in doesn't mean everything's going to be perfect. Just because it's your family doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, right? It takes work to make it good. He says, are you willing to be subordinate? The question is more than a reflection on your relationship with your first chair. It's a question of spirit. What we were talking about earlier, that if you're having a difficult time to serving under someone or being subordinate to someone, it really stems from your relationship with Christ. Are you subordinate to him? Are you willing to serve him? Are you willing to surrender to him? Most of the time it stems from that spiritual relationship. He says, he gives some characteristics. He says, many who aspire to leadership fail because they have never learned to follow. Full of wisdom was one of the requirements for even subordinate leaders in the early church. And a spiritual leader of today is the one who gladly works an assignment, gladly works as an assistant and associate, humbly helping others achieve great things. If you're going to be a spiritual leader, it's going to mean you come alongside of people and working together with somebody, right? That you're doing it together. A call to discipleship. He says a common denominator in these three statements is the thread of discipleship. This involves growing in your spiritual life and growing in your ability to follow. Effective second-chair leaders are successful in the subordinate leader paradox because they learn to follow and repeatedly choose to follow. Tom Billingsley says, if a leader can't be a follower, he can't be an effective leader. So part of that, what he was saying before, if you see yourself moving forward in this, that time, using this as a time of growth and understanding that that's what it can be, it's a time of learning to follow so that you can learn to lead, that you got to be a follower before you can be a leader. And so oftentimes we're ready to get to that leading point, but use this time as an opportunity to let you grow and learn in being a follower first. He says, learning is another important aspect of discipleship, and this challenges leaders to read and to constantly engage in learning opportunities for their own growth. Obviously, all of you are in the School of Ministry or the Leadership Institute because you're wanting to learn and grow. But let me encourage you that even when this is over with, don't stop. Don't stop finding opportunities to grow and to learn. Find you some classes somewhere. Find you somebody that you can sit under and be taught outside of just your normal church setting. Continue to grow. Continue to read on your own. But man, I just encourage you to find something educational wise, whether it's a seminary or anything really. It doesn't have to be a full seminary or anything like that. But find you somewhere classes you can continue to learn and challenge yourself to grow and stretch throughout your ministry, not just at the beginning of it. He says Sanders also emphasizes the importance of a spirit of humility. Leaders must be willing to serve. They should not consider any task to be beneath them. We know that. We know that you got to be willing to do what you're going to ask people to do, and that comes with that humility in our own lives. Is any calling higher than to be a leader in an important ministry that is making a difference in your community? The highest calling you can have, to serve God, to be in his ministry, right? And making a difference in the world. He says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. In Matthew chapter 20, verses 25 through 28, where Jesus was teaching, he said, the Gentiles lord it over them, but not with you, right? He said, Jesus taught that leadership in his kingdom involves subordination. You got to be a servant. You got to be a servant to people and willing to serve people first. Oh, I've got to skip ahead there. Where am I at? There we go. Subordinate leader. He says the paradox is challenging to successfully balance because it is relationally intensive and partially dependent on another person, your first chair, what we said earlier. So what is subordination? What does it mean to serve under somebody? What does it mean to fall into that position? He says subordination is recognizing and accepting that you are not the lead leader. It is acknowledging that you do not have the final authority, nor do you have the ultimate responsibility. So of all the things, the subordinate part is probably the most difficult to accept if you're looking at it as something negative. Understand that we don't have the final say. We're not the last straw. We're not making the final decision. Is not always easy to accept. It should be. It shouldn't be something that's difficult. It should give you relief to know that it's not all on your shoulders, that it falls on somebody else, right? there's a little pressure that's taken off there. But being a subordinate is really the understanding of knowing that, hey, okay, there's still somebody that I'm serving under. Subordination, however, is more than recognition and acceptance. It brings in an attitude of serving with humility and gladness. And he said that subordination grows out of reverence for God. The second chair leader understands that God is the ultimate authority and the giver of authority, that it all comes from God. That's what we've been talking about this whole time, is that all that authority, all the subordination part stems from your relationship with Christ and how do you view him. So subordination is not power hungry. It's not about trying to be the final say. It's not about trying to have that last call. It's about understanding, okay, I'm not, that's not my position. That's not where I'm at, and I'm okay with that. Subordination is not offensive in communication. This involves your words and your body language. That while you're talking to people, while you're treating people, while you're talking to your leader, while you're treating your leader, your actions, when you say things, it's understanding all of that, that you're not offensive in that. That's how you build that relationship. That's how you build trust with people and your leader, is that you're giving them you're giving them non-offensive communication anyway. You don't always have to agree with them, but you're just doing it in a non-offensive way. It talks about this right relationship too. He says, if you want to succeed as a second chair leader, the key lesson of this chapter is the right relationship is everything. That the right relationship with your pastor, senior pastor, is the most important thing that you can have to be a successful second chair leader or whoever your authority is. He says, would you rather be right on the issues or in right relationship? And that goes back to that same illustration I told you about being in marriage, that sometimes being in right relationship, all the time, being in right relationship is better than being right on the issue. That you don't have to argue it until you're dead just to be right on it, just so that everybody knows that you're right. Sometimes it's better to keep that relationship restored and going and healthy than it is to be right. And those who have been in those arguments know what I mean. The variety of characteristics are important for a person to be successful in any ministry or leadership role. Competence, good interpersonal skills, dependability, integrity, and commitment are all necessary. For second chair leaders, however, the attribute at the top of the list is trust. If you can't be trusted, if your senior pastor can't trust you, if the people can't trust you, you're not going to be a good second chair leader. Right? No senior pastor is going to give authority, give decision making over to a second chair if they don't trust them. Right? If the pastor doesn't trust you, then they're going to be involved in everything that you're doing. They're going to micromanage you. You know that if you work in a business place, in the business world, you know how that goes too, that if you're being micromanaged, that usually means that they're not trusting you to do it on your own, that they're having to feel like they got to stick on you and make sure they're there. And some of that comes with, don't be offended if they're doing that, because sometimes if they're doing it, it just means that you haven't learned it yet, that you're new, and nobody's going to trust you right off the bat. You got to earn that trust, right? It comes through consistency. It comes through making the right decisions time and time again. It comes through them seeing you do that. So that trust is earned. It's not given, but it's the most important thing that you can have, that you can be a trustworthy person, that they can hand you something and know that you're in control. Potiphar did that exact same thing with Joseph. He brought his slave in and made him his person because Joseph earned his trust, right? He wouldn't have done that with anybody else that he didn't trust. I don't have all the stories of what happened throughout all of that time period, but I doubt that happened very often, where a slave came in and ended up being in charge of pretty much everything. It came through trust. And we know that trust through Joseph's life came through the Lord, right? That he was trusting in the Lord first, and that flowed through his life and allowed other people to trust him. And it's the same thing for us. So he says a final trust builder is time. That one of the ways you build trust is through time. Let me throw this slide out here. So the right relationship, the benefit of having a right relationship with your pastor, after you build it through trust, is that you'll get an open line of communication. If you got a right relationship with your leader, then you can talk to him about anything all the time. That line's open. If you're kind of skittish about being able to talk to them, if you feel like that y'all don't communicate very well, or that that you can't communicate to them, then that's probably means that you're not in the right relationship that you need to be in, and need to work on it. And it starts with us. We can't control. It may not have been our fault. It may be their fault. But we can't control what they do. We can only control what we do. So we work on that. But if you have a right relationship, you'll have an open line of communication. You'll have a relaxed and enjoyable work environment. If you worked in a business, I worked at Blockbuster back in the day before it closed down. And when I worked at Blockbuster, we had a manager there that was great, and I loved him. And everything was easy, and we come in and had fun, and it was just an enjoyable place to be at. Well, then that person left, and we got another person, and made it miserable. And we did not have a good relationship with that person, and it was not a relaxed and enjoyable work environment. And if you've ever been in those situations, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Those times you dread going in. Those times you dread being there at the office or being around those people because you know that it's just going to be like nails on the chalkboard the whole time that you're there, that you're just trying to get by. But when you have a good relationship with the people you work with, it makes it easy. And that can be an indicator for you and a benefit for you if you have a right relationship with your senior leader. The other one is the opportunity to see your ministry soar to the next level. Because if you have a right relationship with your senior pastor, with your leader, they're going to give you opportunities to grow and to take part in ministry. And they're going to give you opportunities to speak. They're going to give you opportunities to share. They're going to give you opportunities to be a part of what's going on, to make decisions. And as you do that stuff, you'll see your ministry continue to grow in your own life. Wherever you see that, if you're there, if you're where you want to be, it can still grow. Or if you're wanting to advance and move on to something new, this will be your opportunity to grow and to see that continue to press forward. So it's important to have a right relationship with your senior pastor. Sometimes we think that, I'll just hang in there until they're gone, and eventually this person will move out and then things will get better. But I just want to encourage you, from what I was learning in this book, that let's make it right now. Let's work on it right now where it's at with who's there. God's placed that person in authority for a reason. I know we may not always agree with it. I've been through situations with people where they felt like, man, this person just shouldn't be here. But we're not God, and we respect his authority. I'm sure Joseph didn't appreciate Potiphar being his leader, but he understood that and he respected that, and he served him, and he did what he was asked to do, and he was obedient to God in the meantime. And through his obedience to the Lord and through his trust that he earned with his leader, he was able to continue to follow through on what God had planned for his life, right? He was able to advance him. If he hadn't ever earned Potiphar's trust, he might would have still been sitting in that prison and not got the opportunity for God to use him the way he wanted to use him. So it takes building trust, trusting in God, and working on that relationship with our leaders. Then he gives some consequences of a wrong relationship. He says, how does your first chair perceive you? Are you loyal, trustworthy, and competent? Or might you be perceived as insubordinate, opportunistic, or self-serving? You may be striving to implement all the principles found in this book, but if you are perceived to be out of your own interest, you will not be successful in the second chair. This perception could be caused by your actions or by your first chair's insecurity. It could be based on recent events, something in the distant past. Whatever the reason, and this is a unfortunate truth, whatever the reason, your first chair's perception ultimately shapes your reality. So whether their insecurity about you or the way they view you is justified or not, if it's negative, unfortunately, their perception is your reality, right? Pastor Brent's perception about me is my reality. That if he views me as somebody that's trying to advance myself and not the church, not the body of Christ, whether that's true or not, if he views it that way, then that's going to be the reality of that, because he's going to make decisions that stifle me and that cut me off and don't let me minister in the way that I feel like the Lord wants to use me. So it's about earning that trust, open line of communication, all those things we talked about. That's how you help them to have the correct perception of who you are and what you're trying to do. So the final tip is, if you want to learn to be a second chair leader, pay particular attention to the wait staff next time you go to a restaurant. What he says is that he gives the illustration of waiters and how some of them are, if you've ever been to a restaurant where the waiter was just trying to turn the table over, they're rushing you in, rushing you out, trying to get you in there, trying to, maybe you're not quite through eating, they're trying to take your food. They're bringing the check by just for your convenience, and you're like halfway through eating, right? And you hadn't even started. You know that they're trying to say, "Hey, look, get up out of here. We're trying to get some more people over here and make some money." You've been around those type of people before, or if they're just they're never coming back over to the table, maybe they're never there, and then maybe you got a restaurant where you love the waiter or waitress. It's easy for you. You love going there and talking to them because you know they're going to be there. They're refilling your drink every time you get about 3 steps down. And they're topping you off, and you don't even know how many glasses of tea you done drunk because they filled it up before you ever got anywhere with it. Those kind of places, we remember the people that make an impact on us and the waiters and waitresses that make an impact on us. And so what he says about being a second chair leader is that you're anticipating what's going on in the body of Christ, that you're paying attention to what's taking place, that you're seeing what the feel of the church is, that you understand that, you know, if people are in need, that you're there to help them. You're not waiting on somebody to have to track you down and find you. That you're looking at your senior pastor and you're paying attention to what they need and what they're doing. That you're not waiting on them to have to come ask you to do something. But you're jumping in there. You say, okay, I see that this is a need. This something needs to be taken care of. I can tell they need help with it. I'm going to jump in and do it before I'm ever asked. And they remember that, right? They're just like you remember that with a waiter or a waitress. So he gives that illustration, which is kind of interesting, but it's a good illustration. In chapter 4, it says, you've worked diligently to serve, or for several years, to build a strong trust-based relationship with your first chair. Now you get to reap the benefits, but this does not mean you can put the relationship on autopilot. So if you already got a good relationship with them, if you've done everything good, doesn't mean that you just get to sit back and relax. It means continue working on that relationship, right? Continue to do it. He says, talks about marriages again. He says that in most marriages, there's the responsibilities of the house and life are kind of divided, and it's not really always a set standard for, you know, who's going to wash dishes and who's going to fold the clothes or whatever it may be. But usually it's kind of, normally there's not a written out contract saying this is what you do, this is what I do, but it's just learned over time, right? And so the expectation is just there. And so he says, imagine it as like note cards on a string, or note cards laid out in a line. There's a string that's laid down in the middle, kind of dividing them in half. The left-hand side is your responsibility. The right-hand side is my responsibility. He said, but at any time that string can be picked up and moved to where somebody has more responsibility or less based off of the circumstances that are taking place. So if maybe somebody's sick, you know, one person is going to pick up the slack. They're going to understand, you know what, I don't expect you to cook because you're sick, right? I don't expect you to cut the grass because you're sick. I know what's taking place, or whatever may happen in life. Maybe you just work late, different things. So we kind of pick up those responsibilities, and that's not usually something that's talked about. It's just something that just happens, right? We just know that it's there. We understand that, and you just know how that is going to take place. It's just natural. But what he says is, he starts talking about this line that there's there. There's this line of responsibility that you have as a second chair leader. And sometimes it's defined by your job description, right? Sometimes if you entered into the church and you actually got a job description, which probably most of us don't. But if you got one saying, okay, here's the things you're going to be responsible for, then you understood, okay, this was my line. But what you got to understand is that not all that line isn't always in the same place, that it can change over time, that it's a transitional line. So he says the first thing you got to understand is that there is a line and you need to find it. He said the line defines your responsibilities, what you're expected to do, what you are authorized to do, and what is out of bounds. You have a clear idea of where the line is. Can you describe with certainty which decisions you can make without consulting your first chair, which require first chair approval, and which you should not even touch? So what we're talking about, that anticipating the needs of your senior pastor, your senior leader, and taking an initiative to do those things, you should. But you also got to understand that there's a line of your responsibility and things that you can and cannot handle. And there have been many times where things have been stirred up because somebody overstepped their bounds, right? And they did something that they should have had permission to do, or they didn't have the authority to do. So we got to understand that there's a line. We got to find that line. It's different for everybody. It's different. It's unique to your situation, to what you're doing, to your church, to your leader. But there's a line somewhere. You just need to understand. We all understand that we can't just do anything we want to do in our church and everything will be okay, right? And that our pastor be okay with it. At some point, they're not going to be okay with the decisions we make if we go too far. But the line is more than just your job description. That's what he talks about in this next spot. He says, in many ways, the responsibility boundary lines are hardest to define for someone who is in a second chair and easier to specify for others in the organization. If a written job description accurately explains your role and how most of your time is spent, you may not be a second chair leader yet. If your job really begins with the last line of the position description, and this is the last line he puts in quotes, and all other duties as assigned, it points towards a second chair type of role. That if your job can be clearly defined by a job description in your church, you're probably not in a second chair leadership role, because usually that's the role that gets into everything. That's the role that's expected to handle everything, no matter what it may be. And we were kind of discussing that stuff earlier. So he starts giving some measurements of what it means to be a second chair leader, how you can define that. He says, think about how you define success in your role. Now think about how your first chair defines it. If you do all the specific activities in your job description, if you have one, plus any other duties that the first chair has assigned, will you be successful? It says, in all likelihood, the answer is no. A second chair leader, you expect and are expected, as a second chair leader, you expect and are expected to be an initiator. You're expected to see and act on things that help the organization function better. So just doing everything that you're supposed to do and asked to do usually isn't enough, because any leader, whether it's a pastor or a business leader anywhere, what they want from a second chair person, what they want from somebody that's serving under them, is to be an initiator in actions, right? That you see something that needs to be done and you act on it. You're paying attention to what's going on. We all know those things. We understand that. A lot of that comes with the experience of being in the position. You know, when I started at Blockbuster, I didn't know what needed to be done. I didn't understand the things that needed to be done. But after I've been there for a while, I understood stuff that had to happen and stuff that needed to take place. So after a while, you just start doing them on your own, right? You just start jumping in there. You see it needs to be done. You don't wait on somebody to tell you to do it. You just do it. Same thing with if you've worked a job at all, you understand how that goes. Another thing that can get in the way there, or can stand in the way of that, is the ego factor. He calls it the ego factor. He says your ego, or your senior pastor's ego, can define the line. If there's somebody who's got a big ego and wants to be the main person, the line might be a little different, because they might not want you being somebody that's in front of them, or they might not want people seeing you as somebody who's got some power or authority. But if you got a pastor that doesn't have a big ego, that's okay with it, the line may be farther up, because they may want you to do more things out front. They may want people to see you more because they're not concerned about it. But the line's there, the line moves, it can change, it can be different. Just understand that there is a line. So he talks about the fact that you can cross the line. If you've been in an argument with somebody, then you probably cross the line with somebody. You understand what we're talking about. Most of the time we cross a line, it's accidental. Most of the time it's just because we didn't understand that. We thought maybe that was something we could do, but you know, maybe it shouldn't have been. Most of us understand that. If you got kids, you understand about crossing the line. If you are a kid, or have been, which is all of us, and you've dealt with your parents and you crossed the line with them, you understood what it means. So accidentally cross the line is one thing, but then there's intentionally crossing the line. And he talks about how that if you're ever going to cross the line, you need to understand that there's going to be consequences with it. We know that. But intentionally crossing it usually comes with a consequence of losing your position. That if you're intentionally doing something that you know you're not supposed to be doing, or you're making a decision that you're not supposed to be making, you do it on purpose, and your senior leader knows that, it's most of the time going to cost you. He does say that there are 2 times where you can do it. And he says that if you're mistreated, or if your pastor has morally failed, that maybe you do need to cross that line. He says, but even in those cases, you need to be prepared to lose your position as a second chair leader. Even though you're not doing anything wrong, you just need to understand that that's part of it. So take it serious. Don't just go to somebody just because somebody hurt your feelings, or just because your senior leader hurt your feelings, or whatever. Make sure that it's a legitimate reason that we're going to cross it. The line can be changed. He says, yeah, can the line be changed? That question is brought up. Yes, it can be. The line is changed as you earn trust and you earn respect. Then you get more responsibility as you're seen as somebody who initiates and does what you're supposed to do without being asked. That line grows. If you break trust of your pastor, if you're doing things constantly, you're crossing the line constantly by accident, even if it's not on purpose. If you're doing it over and over again, that line's going to get closer. You're going to lose responsibility, right? You're going to lose opportunity. But just understand that it's a actual thing. It's really there. There's no literal line, but there is a figurative line that's there, and we just need to find out where it's at inside of our setting, inside of your church. What can you do? What can't you do? And then what are things that you can find to initiate that are within your area of responsibility that your pastor not going to be upset about. And again, that all flows back to your relationship with your pastor. If you know them well, you understand them well, then you'll have a better understanding of that line and what you can and can't do. But you got to work on that relationship with them. All right. Second one is deep wide paradox. I'm going to try to blast through these next little sections here, okay? The second paradox is the deep and wide paradox. So he says second chair leaders' roles require them to see the big picture and make decisions that affect the entire organization, while also being asked to delve into the details to solve a problem in a specific part of the organization. That it's not that you're expected to be just over your area, but you're expected to be over your area and also know about everything else that's going on in the church. Also know about what's taking place in other areas. You need to have a deep perspective on your area, but also a wide perspective of being able to see the whole picture and what's taking place in the church. He says, can someone in the second chair really add value throughout the organization? That's where that definition of throughout it comes in. He says, the truth is that adding value throughout the organization is not a function of position, it's a matter of perspective. As you move down the organization chart from the first chair, you find positions with ever more narrow, defined responsibilities. But effectiveness as a second chair leader requires that you see the big picture, even as you are continuing to serve with excellence in your functional role. This is the essence of the deep wide paradox, that you're continuing to do your job in your area, whatever that may be in your church, while also having a feel for what's taking place around you and in the rest of the church. So he says second chair or second tier. Some second chair leaders primarily see the big picture. They spend their time thinking about the future and the possibility of what the congregation can become. They struggle, however, to understand the details and develop a plan of action. At worst, these individuals lose their leadership influence because they are labeled unproductive dreamers, people with great ideas, but with no ability to follow through. Maybe you know somebody that you would say falls into that realm. I've met people over the years that are extremely creative in the ideas that they have, and they can dream big, but when it comes to the actual nuts and bolts of getting it done, they just got no idea, and there's really no follow through to it. And it's great to have big dreams. You need to, and you need to have an idea of where the ministry can go and where it can be, but you also got to be somebody who follows through in those things. So the other end of the continuum are the leaders who have deep knowledge of their specific area of responsibility. They know every person in their ministry. They have in-depth plans for how every program in their realm should operate. You never worry about something falling through the cracks where they are involved, but they are sometimes criticized as hyper-focused and only interested in their area. They may be accused of being overprotective of their turf. They often fail to see how their actions and the activities in their ministry affect other parts of the congregation. So I see probably in our ministry more of that, where I think you at one point even said, like, you have teachers, Sunday school teachers, that think they own their classroom and things like that, that we have become overprotective of our own personal ministry, and that everything revolves around the one area that we serve in, and we forget that there's a whole church going on with a whole bunch of different ministries around us, and that we can't make every decision based off of our one ministry, right? As a youth pastor, it's easy for me to get hyper focused on youth and make every decision based off of the youth, and think that all the budget money should go to us and that we should get to do whatever we want to do. And if the church is going to take up an offering, it should be for the youth, and we need to take because we need the money. We need to raise it. So it's easy to get focused on that and lose sight of the fact that we're not the only ministry in the church, right? That the youth or the children or the outreach or whatever it may be, the senior adult ministry, your Sunday school class, whatever it is, isn't the only ministry in the church. And a second chair leader is different from a second tier leader or a second tier role, because you understand and you're looking at the whole rather than just your one area, right? There are a lot of second tier people and positions within a church because there are a lot of people who help in a bunch of different areas, but there are not that many second chair leaders who understand that we got to be beyond just our deep in our one focus area of ministry, but we got to be wide too. We got to work through this paradox. We understand that we're expected to know every detail about our one specific ministry, but also know the details of every other thing that are going on around it. That's what a senior pastor needs. That's what they're looking for. That's what they want. Somebody they can trust to be a part of all of that. They know what's taking place. I got another slide for you here. So we played the up close picture game. This is a similar thing. Everybody see that picture on there? Anybody got a guess at what they think it is?
Like a cloud.
Cloud? Anybody else?
Mostly just like black. I would say it's like a line.
Okay, just a black rectangle. Anybody else? All right, I'm gonna show you another one. How about this one? These are all the same thing, by the way. Let me add them together. What you think? Anybody? No, nothing. All right, here's one more. Is that helpful?
No, not right.
Anybody? All right, here's what it is.
Car.
It's all parts of that plane right there.
Mm.
Just zoomed in really close and you can't tell. So this kind of the illustration that he was given. He says that if we're not careful, we're zoomed in on our own ministry, right? And we're not seeing the big picture. So when we're looking at it up close, we can't understand what's really taking place because we're too close to one situation. We're only looking at one area when you need to be looking at the entire picture. And that's what separates you from a second tier position and a second tier leader. You don't just see up close in your one area. You're looking at the big picture when you're making decisions and when you're choosing to do things. That when you're talking to somebody, you're not just, or you're getting on to somebody, or you're having to make a decision about an area, that we're not just doing it based off of our one small view of our ministry, but we're looking at the whole big picture and we're seeing the full. So it's important to make sure that we're looking at the big picture in everything that we do, and we're not just deep, but that we're also wide. He says, how can you develop a deep and wide perspective? The most important concept for learning to see deep and wide is for developing second chair insights into your congregation, systems thinking. Systems thinking is a discipline for seeing wholes, is a framework for seeing interrelationships rather than things, for seeing patterns of change rather than static snapshots. Systems thinking help you to understand that a change in one aspect of the congregation ripples through the rest of the body. It is not possible to make one isolated adjustment and maintain the status quo everywhere else. And then there was a quote that he gave. He says, it's in Leading Congregational Change. He says that every change changes everything. Every change changes everything. So just like we were talking about earlier, there's often times where I want to adjust things. I want to make some changes in our youth ministry or whatever it may be. What I have to understand is that just because it's easy for me to get frustrated if I want to change something and my pastor doesn't, because what he's looking at is the big picture. He's looking at how is this going to affect everything in the church, not just your one area of ministry. And as a second chair leader, we do good to remember that every change changes everything. That if we're going to change something a little bit, it doesn't mean that change is bad. That change can be great. That change can be a good thing and a needed thing, because everything times does need to change. And it can change in a good way, but we just need to be understanding, make sure we have the understanding that if we change something, it will have an effect on the rest of the ministry, the rest of the church. So we just need to make sure that we're looking at that big picture and not just too close to the situation or too close to one area to see how that's going to affect everything. The systems thinking requires seeing the forest and the tree, which is the same deal as talking about, that you're understanding that one tree is a part of something bigger. A second chair leader, however, as a second chair leader, however, your attention to detail must extend beyond your specific assignments. The most valuable second chair leaders develop a deep and wide perspective that extends throughout the organization. They become knowledgeable of the key aspects of all ministry areas. They do so without unduly intrusive and without damaging relationships with their peers. They seek this knowledge to improve the organization's overall effectiveness. In fact, their great contribution is seeing the connections between silos and finding solutions that cross organizational boundaries. So what he says is, as a second chair leader, that part of our responsibility is understanding what's going on in all areas of ministry. So that if your pastor comes to you and says, hey, look, what's happening, what's taking place here, you can talk to them about it. Like, I don't know, they're doing their thing. I don't know what they do. I don't know what takes place in the ladies' ministry. I'm not a lady, right? So I don't know what goes on. I don't know what happens in the men's ministry. I'm not a man. I don't know what's going on over there. But as a second chair leader, that you have an idea of what's taking place in all those ministries. But it says that you do it without being intrusive to people, because we know that people are protective of their ministries. We know that. We understand that. We've been in church long enough to know nobody wants you coming over there telling them how to do their ministry or how to operate there. I'm not saying we need to do that, but that you build relationships with those people, that there's somebody that trusts you and that knows that you're not going to come in and just try to take over something from them, but that you just love them and you care about them and you know what you're trying to get a beat on what's going on around the church and know what's taking place. But have an idea what's going on in your church. Have an idea. If you want to be a second chair leader in your ministry, in your church, make sure you have an idea what's taking place in all the areas of ministry. And do that through building relationships with the leaders or the other people who are in charge of those things. Then he says building a team. Too many second chair leaders think they have to wait for formal authority, as indicated by lines and boxes on an organizational chart, before they can truly have an impact on their organization. You can do it without having an official role, without having any kind of title. You don't have to have a title to be a second chair leader. It's just about how you operate and how you work and your attitude toward it. The second chair who waits to be given the reins of control is unlikely to be an effective leader if and when that authority is extended. If you're waiting around on somebody to say, hey, look, this is what I want you to do, this is your authority now, then you're probably not going to be a good leader when that time comes, because leaders lead regardless of their position or what their title. It's about understanding that we're wanting to see the church grow and be better. We're wanting our church to continue to move forward, and we're wanting to help our pastor along the way, and we're wanting to encourage them and stand beside them. This is, how are your relationships with other staff members and key leaders in your congregation or workplace? If they are not as strong as you would like, why is that the case? One major element that undermines these relationships is a lack of time spent developing them. So if you don't have relationships, and relationships with the people in your church and the other leaders in your church or your workplace aren't where they need to be, most of the time it's because we haven't spent the time to develop that relationship with them. We can't make them do it, but we can control our own actions and what we do, and we can make sure that we're spending that time. So he talks about developing a team, and not only just a team, but a real team. Because there's a lot of people you can put together and call it a team, but it's not a real team. But he says that a real team is a small number of people with complementary skills who are committed to a common purpose, performance goals, and approach for which they hold themselves mutually accountable. He says a team is not simply created by an edict from a first chair. It requires the full commitment of the team members. And as a second chair leader, you need to be somebody who puts a team around you. Build a team. If you're trying to do it all on your own, you're like a pastor who's trying to do it all on his own, a senior pastor who's trying to do it all on their own, and you'll get burnt out and you'll get overwhelmed. If you're expected to know everything about every area of ministry, then it can be a lot for one person to handle. It can be too much. And if it's not right now, hopefully as you grow, it will be too much for you. So it's about, I would encourage you to help to build a team, to find people around you that you can trust and you can talk to and that can help you in your ministry. But it's not going to happen just because somebody said, I put you on a team. It's going to happen because you spent the time to build a relationship with those people and work with them, and that y'all are working together. It didn't just, I've been a part of a lot of teams that were just put together because they were on paper, and that doesn't make you a team. What makes you a team is that you have a relationship with those people who are working with you. He says that rank is less important than relationship. Successful cooperation is more important than winning a competition. And valuing diversity and a non-hierarchical attitude are key characteristics for a second chair leader. That it's all about the attitude, right? That's what he was talking about earlier. It's all about your attitude and what you're doing. He says when a true team emerges, performance improves not because team members like each other better, but because collectively they can make better decisions on the important issues facing the organization. So when you're building that relationship with people, it doesn't mean that you all hang out outside of church more often. That's not what makes you a better team. It can, but that's not necessarily what makes you a better team. It means that you've worked together and you know how to work together and you know how to move forward with decisions and with the church together because you spent that time building that relationship. So it talks about some things to avoid that are lethal to teams. He says self-promotion is lethal for teams. The second chair should always keep the entire organization in mind. If you're not careful, nobody wants to work with somebody who's using them to promote themselves. Nobody wants to be a part of a team of somebody that's doing that. Your teammates, your team members are going to see through that. They're going to see through what your intentions and what you're trying to do. So as you pick people and you bring people onto a team and you move forward that and begin to build those relationships with them, make sure that what your intentions are not self-serving, and then you're not just doing it so that you can get looked at and promoted. He says some practical steps for avoiding the traps that undermine teamwork. So if you've ever had a difficult time working with your team, you may know that these are some of the causes, some of the reasons that it's difficult. Steps for avoiding the traps that undermine teamwork. First one is be selective. It's not necessary to have a comment or opinion on every issue, especially if your natural tendency is to be critical. Be especially careful around those with whom you have not established a strong working relationship. That teamwork can be destroyed if you're negative about, or if you got somebody on there on your team that's negative about everything that goes on. We all know those people. We all know somebody that's going to shut down every single thing, every single idea that's brought up. They can't see the positive side of anything. Second one is be affirming. The 2-to-1 principle is helpful. Offer 2 positive and encouraging comments for every 1 criticism. If encouragement is not your natural temperament, this is all the more reason to make it a regular habit. Make sure you're affirming to your team members, or if you're a part of the team, make sure you're affirming. Be unselfish. Think about the needs of the organization and your coworkers. Be sure your recommendations are not always benefiting you. Be discreet. If you have a choice, save the negative comments for an offline one-on-one meeting before you tell the entire staff about the mistake that was made by a colleague. Make sure you address that stuff in private. Be constructive. Learn to say yes and in discussions rather than yes but. The latter indicates disagreeing with the idea, while the former is an affirming way to build on a colleague's positive suggestion. And be involved. A team is not something to be delegated. Involvement enables you to do all of the things listed here, keep you in the close relationship so that your praises and critiques are interpreted correctly. Be involved with your teammates. Be involved with the team that you've set up or the team that you're a part of. If you're not setting up a team for you personally, you're just a part of a leadership team. Make sure you keep those things in mind, because those things can undermine teamwork. They can make people not want to be a part of it, or make them want to shut you off from the team if you're falling into the trap of being on the negative side of those things. The next thing he says, the second chair leader is a servant leader. The chemistry of an effective team is analyzed by one final concept: servant leadership. If you're going to lead, the team. Make sure that you're being a servant. Make sure that your ideas, your thoughts, and what you're doing are there to serve the church. Make sure people see that in your life. They understand you're there to serve. You're not there for yourself. So he talks about 4 practices that we can do to be a good team leader. First one is be a pulse taker. Be a pulse taker. Knowing what others are thinking and feeling is valuable information for you and the first chair. Your role places you in a unique position to keep a finger on the pulse of the organization. This is part of that deep and wide thing. Know what's going on in the church. Know what's taking place among the people. I think we said earlier that sometimes it's easier for people to talk to somebody in a second chair role than it is the senior pastor. Maybe you appear to them as being more approachable for whatever reason, but sometimes we can have a pulse on things that are going on that our pastor doesn't see because they're having to look at all kind of other things. So just make sure you're keeping a pulse on what the atmosphere and the attitude of the church is. Be a vision amplifier. The first chair is the primary vision caster in the organization, but a second chair leader has many opportunities to repeat, clarify, and reinforce the vision. Make sure you're behind your senior pastor and you're amplifying the vision that they have for that church. If you got a separate vision and you're talking about your vision and the senior pastor's talking about his, that's going to bring divisiveness. It's going to destroy a church. It's going to break it down. That's how churches end up splitting. That's how things are destroyed there. Make sure you're behind your senior pastor 100%. Make sure people see that from you, hear that from you. Be a leader multiplier. Just for the second chair, identifying and recruiting other leaders who can help the church to be an ongoing priority. Part of that team building thing. Make sure that you're constantly finding other people. You're identifying people who are leaders in your congregation, and you're helping to pour into them, and you're creating other leaders yourself. And then the final one is to be a gap filler. So there's no other leader who can serve in a critical role. If there is no other leader who can serve in a critical role, the second chair should be prepared to fill the gap. And I would think, for my case, and probably for most of our cases, that's a big one for most of us, that there are usually a lot of things that there's just nobody else to do it. And so either our pastor asks us to do it or it just goes undone. But I want to encourage you to be somebody who jumps in there and just fills that gap. Just do it. If you see that it needs to be done, there's nobody else to do it, then as a second chair leader, it's part of our expectation. It should be anyway. And it'll go a long way for helping your church grow. Your senior pastor can't do everything. You can't. He needs to be focused on casting the vision of the church and ministering to the people. And it can be our job to jump in there and fill those gaps. So make sure we're doing those things as well. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because I'm pretty much done there with that second one. Final questions in that paradox, that deep and wide paradox he asks. He says, are you a deep and wide second chair leader? Do you have a tendency toward one side of the paradox or other? Do you see yourself as somebody who focuses more on one of those areas? Would you classify yourself as being more focused on your own ministry and forgetting about the whole? Would you classify yourself as a dreamer, somebody who's got big ideas and plans, but you are not very focused on your own ministry? Sometimes the structural part of it is tough for you. or would you say you're kind of balanced and where you need to be, and you have a good feel for what's going on in your ministry, a good framework for it, but you're also looking at the big picture, and it's just to kind of make you think about where you've been in those areas. Last one, we'll get to the third paradox. We'll do a breakout right after this one's over with. Third paradox: contentment dreaming. Contentment dreaming. Contentment dreaming is the third paradox. It makes us wonder if it is possible to dream great dreams and be content at the same time. This is the one that I think most of us feel like we need answered, or at least I felt like anyway, me personally needed answered. Contentment dreaming. He says it stirs up a restless tension in our souls. It makes us wonder if it's possible to dream great dreams and be content at the same time. Again, he goes back to Joseph, and he talks about how Joseph had these dreams of what the Lord gave him and showed him that he would be ruling over his family and he would make him a great leader. But Joseph also found himself in a position that was far from that. And Joseph had to make a decision of whether he could be content where he was while still continuing to be a dreamer and continuing to understand that God had dreams for his life. And we know that he does. And the argument he makes in the book is that the reason we can tell that Joseph became content in where he was is because he decided to be obedient and an obedient subordinate to Potiphar. He did the things he needed to do. He served him in how he needed to serve. Even when an opportunity came for him to, when Potiphar's wife accused him or was trying to come on to him, Joseph stayed true to who he was and what God had for him. He continued to remember the dream he had, that he was God's servant. And he was even obedient to Potiphar in that moment where he didn't disobey him or he didn't come against him and do something that would hurt him. And then we know that Joseph kind of took the fall for that. And as a second chair leader, oftentimes you'll take the fall for things to protect your senior leader. That's just part of the role. It's part of the position. Sometimes you got to take the heat for them. And it's not always fair. It's usually never fair as far as we're concerned, but it is part of the role. But it's understanding that, hey, you know what? It's going to be worth it. We're being obedient to the Lord. We're being obedient to where he's placed us, to the leader he's placed in our life. And we know, and I know you understand that I'm not talking about in big situations that you don't take the fall for major things, but taking the heat off of your pastor sometimes is okay. It's not going to kill us. The quote he says is from Peter Senge. He says, "This concept of creative tension is a powerful tool for understanding and living with this paradox. In the fifth discipline," he says, "we are actually aware of the gaps between our vision and reality. These gaps can make a vision seem unrealistic or fanciful. They can discourage us and make us feel hopeless. But the gap between vision and current reality is also a source of energy. If there was no gap, there would be no need for any action to move toward the vision. Indeed, the gap is the source of creative energy. We call this gap creative tension." So what he's saying is that if you think about your ministry right now and where you're at and what you're doing and how you're operating, and then you think about the dream you have for your ministry and where you feel like God's called you and what he's placed you and what he wants you to do, and maybe where you're at and where you feel like you're going to be at some point, there's a gap in between those two things, right? That you're not at that place yet, possibly. Maybe you are, and that's awesome. But what he's saying is that sometimes we can look at that and think and get frustrated and get upset, thinking that, look, I'm not where God wants me to be yet. I'm not to that place. The ministry I want and that I know that God has for me is not where it needs to be. That, we just haven't got to that point yet, and it can get frustrating. It can get discouraging. But what he says is that really that gap shouldn't be frustrating and discouraging. What it really should be is motivating, because it shows us, hey, you know what? I'm continuing to move forward. I'm continuing to work in this ministry. I'm continuing to be obedient to God and follow him and work. He says the gap is actually really shouldn't be the source of frustration. It should be the source of motivation to move us to get to that place and to get to that ministry and to get to that goal that God has for us, that we're still working on. Joseph could have gotten discouraged where he was, but instead he understood that, no, I know that God's taking me somewhere else, and I'm going to continue to work toward it. And I'm going to continue to move until God gets me to the place that he's shown me. So let that be something of motivation and not discouragement for you in your life. If you don't feel like your ministry is what it needs to be right now, keep working, keep moving forward, keep being obedient to God, keep letting him grow you and change you. And because if he's shown it to you, he's promised it to you, and he's going to be faithful to it. Our job is just to stay the course in the meantime, right? Our job is to keep pressing forward, to keep trusting him, to keep moving with him. This is also oftentimes, or all too often, second chairs lose sight of the contentment in their ministry. So learning to be content is not always easy, and usually the source of frustration, especially in a second chair, because usually there's more turnover in second chairs than in first chairs, but it can happen to a pastor too. Usually what happens is we just forget about being content where we are. We get upset. We feel like things need to be different, need to be changed. We're not happy with the situation. We're not happy with stuff. We feel like it's not happening as soon as we want it to, or as fast as we want it to. People aren't listening to what we're saying. People are stubborn and not wanting to get in line with the program and follow the vision, and it can get frustrating, but we got to learn to be content where we are. So one of the things he does is define contentment. And this is what he says, is a contentment in the second chair is your choice to stay and grow and excel for a season, regardless of the current circumstances. Contentment is in the second chair is your choice to stay and grow and excel for a season, regardless of current circumstances. And that goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, that there's so many times that we all do it, that we blame the situation and the circumstances and maybe where the church is at the moment and the people that are in the church for why we can't do what we want to do, or why we're unhappy, or why we're not where we need to be. But contentment is making the decision to continue to grow, continuing to stay, continuing to excel, regardless of what's happening around us, right? Regardless of the circumstances that we're in. He kind of breaks down that definition as well. He says contentment in the second chair is your choice to stay and grow and excel. The first one, he says, when you choose to stay, you will not allow short-term disappointment or conflict to push you toward the exit. Staying is a commitment to remain in your current position with focus and intensity until God clearly moves you to a new place of service. Once you decide to stay, then start growing. So we all know that in church there is a extremely high turnover rate of people, because you get frustrated, and when you get frustrated, the first thought most of the time is, I got to move, I got to do something different. I'm not sticking around if people aren't going to do what I want to do. But being part of understanding and living with that contentment in your life and being content, we know that Paul spoke about that is making the commitment that I'm going to stay, right? That I'm going to see this through. I'm going to be a part of it. And I'm not saying you have to stay at one church forever and never leave, but it's being committed to where God's called you to be. If you know that he's told you to be there and that's where you're supposed to be, then just because things get rough isn't a good enough reason to leave. So you're choosing to stay. And he said, once you choose to stay, you choose to grow. That you got to start growing, start learning, taking classes, doing what you're doing now, being a part of all those things, are choosing to grow in that ministry, not just be there and staying there and not doing anything. He says, and then the next part of that definition is choosing to stay and grow and excel, to excel in that ministry, to give it your best, that passion again, to giving everything you have to it, not being okay with just coasting through week to week and just getting by week to week, just so you have something, just so you can say you did your job, or you got your ministry did something that week, so you can put something on the calendar, but making sure that what we're doing is excelling in our ministries, that we're intentionally giving our best to it. He says, then you're choosing to do it for a season. He said, this requires a big picture understanding of your development in ministry. If you're going to do it for a season, you need to understand what God's called you to and where you're going, what that vision is for your life, what that vision is for your ministry, so you can understand what season you're in and where you're supposed to be and if you're in the right place. And he says, contentment in the second chair is your choice to stay, grow, and excel for a season, regardless of the current circumstances. And that's the biggest one, that most of the time, our decision of whether we're happy or excited or giving our best or growing or willing to stay or whatever is based off of the circumstances. So it's so many times that we
Abel.
Jen,
Abel.
mute your thing. We can hear you. We hear you calling Abel.
So Abel better hurry up and get over here too, by the way. So I don't know what I was saying. No, so regardless of your current circumstances, that's the biggest one. That's the one that usually determines whether we're willing to stay or grow or excel in what we're doing, is our circumstances surrounding us. But again, what he says is that as a second chair leader, we're understanding that our circumstances we can't control. We can control our decisions, our attitudes, our passion, our decisions, and you focus on that. You work on understand that if God's called you there and you know you're where He's called you to be, that you just stay in there and you continue to do it, and He's going to make sure that He helps you through that, and He'll work out the rest. He says, in the process of choosing contentment, we must believe that God is going to show us His bigger picture someday. Second chairs must often discover how to choose contentment amid great frustration. You may feel you're going through a prison experience. So he's talking about with Joseph. You pray and long for freedom, yet God does not release you from the setting. In such times, you may feel loss, hopelessness, fatigue, restlessness. Your emotion is screaming at you to leave and find rest and relief, but you know in your heart that you are right where God wants you. Some second chair leaders see their current roles as a destination, but others describe their current place of service as an intermediate point in their career journey. It may be a stop that is fulfilling or long-lasting, but it is definitely not the destination of your dreams. If you know that it's where God has you for this time, for this season, then you stay in there. Our job is just to trust God and know that He's in control and know that He's going to take care of us, even when we're frustrated and upset. Psalm 37, verses 3-6 says, trust in the Lord and do good. Then you will live safely in the land and prosper. Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you your heart's desire. Commit everything you do to the Lord. Trust Him, and He will help you. He will make your innocence radiate like the dawn, and the justice of your cause will shine like the noonday sun. Be still in the presence of the Lord, and wait patiently for Him to act. What he says is, do we see God's response to our responsibility? In 4 and 6, God promises that He will give us the desires of our heart, make our righteousness shine like the dawn, and make the justice of our cause like the noonday sun. So simply stated, there are great advantages in choosing contentment and waiting on God. He will do what we cannot do, even in our greatest strength and effort. We are responsible for the waiting, trusting, and dwelling, and He is responsible for the outcome. That our job, if we are where we know He wants us to be, our job is to do the waiting and the trusting, and His job is to take care of the outcome. It's not our responsibility, it's His. But we just continue to rely and to trust on Him, and know that if we are where He's called us to be, that we're in His hands and that we're walking in His will, that He'll take care of us. It's the sources of contentment. How can we experience God's grace as we seek to find contentment in the second chair? What specific steps should we take? And there's no simple formula, but it's helpful to keep some sources of contentment in mind. The first one he says is your identity in Christ should be your greatest source of contentment. That we should be content in knowing that we are a child of God, and I know that we know that's true, but that's not always our main focus when we're discontent and we're not happy. But really, our contentment should really honestly just come through Him, and that's it, and that should be enough. As humans, it's not always enough for our minds and our hearts to grasp to, but it should be. It says, if your daily walk is not rooted in Christ, contentment will always escape you. Another source of contentment is calling. Do you remember your calling? You remember the day that God called you to ministry. You remember what He placed on your life and what He said He would do and where He wanted you to go. And how has your calling grown over time? As you seek to thrive in the second chair, your calling will always be at the heart of your contentment. You remember that God's called you. If you keep that in your heart and in your mind, then you'll know and you'll be okay and you'll be content where you're at, or it'll help you be content where you're at, because it'll remind you that you're just doing what God's called you to do in the first place, right? That He doesn't make a mistake. He doesn't mess up. His callings aren't for this moment, and He decides that He don't want you to be a minister anymore. He puts a calling to ministry on your life. It's for a lifetime, and you just remember that and cling to that. Contentment can also be developed and encouraged through relationships both inside and outside the church setting. If you don't have a good relationship with your pastor or the people in your church, then it's going to be easy to get discontent, right? When you do have a good relationship with them, it's easy to be content. And the fruit of the ministry is the final source of contentment. That when you see fruit, and we all know that, you can go through the roughest time of ministry of your life, and then you see somebody get saved, or somebody comes to you and tells you what's happened to them through a ministry that you've been a part of, and that can just change your whole outlook and whole perspective on what's been going on. It reminds you that it's all worth it, and that everything you go through and all the struggle you go through is okay. Man, I've had times where I just wanted to strangle a whole bunch of kids for acting crazy, and then one of them comes to you and tells you what the Lord's been doing in their life, and it just changes that perspective. It helps you to be content in what you're doing. So then he says there's some challenges to contentment, and there's 3 things that he points out. So one of them is a lack of patience with God's timing, that we forget that God's timing is not our time, and when we get impatient with that, we don't think things are working on the time scale that, or the timeline that we want it to happen, then it can easily get frustrating. The second one is a lack of awareness of God's big picture, that we understand that God sees more than we see, that while we're looking at that zoomed in close-up picture, even if we're looking at the whole church, we're still looking at a zoomed in close-up picture of time in general, right? But God sees it all. He's the big picture of everything, and he knows how it's going to work out, and we just got to remember that he's in control and that he can see it even when we can't. And the third one is a lack of skills to do the work that's required. Sometimes if we don't have the ability or the skill to do what we're being asked to do, then it can lead to discontentment because we feel frustrated and upset all the time. That's part of why we need to continue to grow, continue to learn. God will help you get through those things. He's not saying that you have to be skilled at everything, and that you shouldn't accept things if you're not skilled at them. What he's saying is that we continue to grow, we continue to learn on a daily basis, that we make it a lifelong commitment to learn and grow, to develop new skills, so that when we're asked to do things in the church and we're given the opportunity, not only when we're asked, but when we're just given the opportunity to do things, to serve the Lord, that we've worked on different skills in our life, that we've continued to grow so that we're prepared for that. All right, the last section here, actually it's chapter 9, I think there's a chapter 10, but the last section is something I want you to listen to, because I want you to, this is where your assignment's going to come from for the class, which I know is what everybody's been looking forward to, writing your paper. So there's 2 things based off of, and you can just choose either one. Some of it may be based off of kind of your roles right now. But it's about dreaming. So the second paradox is that contentment and dreaming. We talked about the contentment side, now the dreaming side. How do you dream in the second chair? So here's the first question. If you want to write these down, I'll give them to you at the end too, to remind you. But the first one is, in your heart of hearts, what do you long to see God do in and through your life? You don't have to do the in the heart of hearts part, but what do you long to see God do in and through your life? So I think I was told the papers had to be about 2 pages. So basically, what do you want God? What do you long to see God do in and through you? What has He shown you? What do you feel like God's going to use you for? And here's the other take on that. If you already are part of a ministry or have the ministry that you feel like you need to be in, is what are your ultimate dreams for your ministry? What are your ultimate dreams for your ministry? They're similar. You might be the same question, just worded differently, but basically, I just want to know what God's placed on your heart. Ideally, when you see yourself in your ideal ministry that God's called you to, what does it look like? How do you see yourself? Where do you see God taking you? Are you already there? Maybe you're already in that ministry that you feel like is your dream and where God's called you to. Or what do you want God to do in and through you? One of those 2 things, whichever one you want to take, that's what I'd like for your paper to be about. And the reason I picked that one personally is because I think it'll be something good to look back on later on, while you're in ministry, to remind you of those dreams that you have, remind you of what God's called you to. When you're feeling discontent and you're not happy anymore, you're frustrated, or things just don't seem to go the way you want it to, I want it to be something you can pull out and look at and remind yourself that, hey, you know what, this is what God's told me He's going to do in my life. This is what He's shown me, and I'm going to continue to trust Him even when things are difficult, even though that I may not see how that's going to happen. I'm remembering that He has a bigger picture and He sees it all even when I don't. That when I'm looking at those zoomed in close-ups, He's looking at the big overall, and He knows exactly how it'll play out even when I can't see it. So let that be something as you write it with the intention of it being something you can look back on. Trust me, I know how the paper writing stuff goes. Sometimes I wrote a lot of times I wrote them just to get by and just stick words in there just to get through with the paper. But let it be something that encourages you, something you can look back on and encourage yourself with. as you remember what God's called you to. So he asks those two questions. And then he says, you must pursue your dreams wholeheartedly. You should be scared of not fulfilling your dreams. God made the human heart to dream, and the dream is the most fulfilling of all. And the dream that is most fulfilling of all is the one he has put in your heart. That just because you're not the senior pastor doesn't mean that you shouldn't dream. He says you need to chase your dreams. You need to pursue your dreams, especially if it's the one that God's placed in your heart at all costs. You need to continue to pursue that because that's the most successful and rewarding thing you can do. Even when Joseph was serving in all the different positions, even when he was in prison, in jail, in a pit, he was still pursuing the dream that God had in his life, that God placed on his heart. And it's the most important thing that you can do. He does give some ideas of what he calls dream stewardship, and it's how to steward that dream that God's placed in your life, how to take care of, how to grow that dream that God's placed in your life. And he says, what are the key lessons of dream stewardship? The first one he says is be careful what you say and to whom you say it. And if you've ever shared a big dream that the Lord's placed on your life with somebody that didn't really care that much about you or didn't care about that dream, then you'll understand what he's talking about, because you can't always just share right away big dreams that God's placed in your life with people and expect them to be behind that dream, expect them to be as excited about it as you are, because that's usually not the case. If God hasn't placed that on their heart and it's something outlandish and something big, and most of the time, and hopefully dreams are things that you don't see the way to, you don't have a path to get to that dream, you're just trusting God because he showed it to you. Then when other people see that, the response oftentimes is that's not, it's going to be negative. They're not going to encourage you, because they're going to say, no, you can't do that. There's no way you're going to get to that point. How's that going to happen? So be careful what and who you say and tell your dreams to. I put a star by this one along those lines because I wanted to remember it too. And it says, if you are not blessed with a trusted advisor, first of all, he says, find you a trusted advisor, trusted confidence, somebody that you can share that dream with. If there's somebody in your life that will support you no matter what, that they're not looking for the details, and if you got somebody in your life like that, then that's awesome, and that's somebody you can share it with. He says, but if you are not blessed with a trusted advisor, it is best to keep your dreams to yourself until God's plans and timings are clear. Some people in your life are not prepared to bless the dreams God has put inside of you. Be careful what you share, when you share, and with whom you share it. But I love that part where he said that some people in your life are not prepared to bless the dreams God has put inside of you. Man, there's some people that aren't going to bless that dream. They're not going to get behind it. They're just going to discourage you. They're going to tell you all the reasons you can't do it. But find you somebody in your life. If you don't have somebody already, the greatest thing you can have is somebody in your life that'll bless those dreams that God puts in your life, that'll stand behind you and encourage you in it. The other one he says is check your ego at the door. And he gives that example of Joseph at the beginning when he shared his dream with his brothers, that most likely his ego wasn't in the right place when he was sharing that. Yeah, he was sharing a vision that the Lord gave him, but he kind of shared it in a wrong way, in a negative way, telling his brothers that, hey, this is what's going to happen. Y'all going to bow down and worship me. And they saw that, and it hurt them. So make sure when you're sharing your dream, that your ego's in the right place. You're not doing it out of a sense of pride, that God's given you something that he hadn't given anybody else. That's another reason that people will shut down that dream, because they feel like they're getting left out, that if you make it seem that way anyway. It says, God is responsible for putting the dream in your heart. You are the steward once the dream is planted. Then once God put that dream in your life, now it's our job to protect it and to grow it and to nourish it. It's our job to steward that dream. That's all what he's been talking about: growing, being content where you are, learning, having the right attitude, having an attitude of passion, doing everything, serving the Lord with passion, being obedient in all those places, in all the areas that he's put us in, making sure that we're building relationships and right relationships in the right way, that we're not condemning people, putting people down all the time, that we're not lording over people, but that we have a servant's heart, a servant's attitude. And we know that all of those things are the things that Jesus demonstrated, right? All of that is his life. We just look at his life and we mimic that. We know that he showed us all of that before we ever got to this point. Share this other slide with you here. This is a quote from Andy Stanley. He was saying, if you allow yourself to dream and keep the dream alive, it's easier to understand the sanctification and cultivation process through which God is leading you. It's also easier to thrive in your current situation because you desire to be used by God and grow in his work. And then this quote from Andy Stanley says, God is using your circumstances to prepare you to accomplish his vision for your life. Your present circumstances are part of the vision. You are not wasting your time. You're not spinning your wheels. You're not wandering in the wilderness. If, that's a big one, if you are seeking first his kingdom where you are, then where you are is where he has positioned you. And he has positioned you there with a purpose in mind. It may be difficult for you to make the connection at this point, but in time, it will come together. It always does. Man, that how affirming is it and relaxing for our life can it be if we could really grasp the concept and understand that where we're at and what we're going through and the circumstances that we're in, that if we're seeking first God's kingdom, then it's okay. It's right where he wants us to be. We're in the place he's prepared for us. It doesn't really matter what it looks like right now. It doesn't really matter if it's what we think it should be or not. It doesn't matter if it feels like it's working or not. If we're seeking first God's kingdom and his will for our life, then where we're at is part of the vision he has for us. And that was the same thing that happened for Joseph, that Joseph continued to search and seek God first. And because of that, all the stuff he went through was part of God's vision for his life. All the things he dealt with and all the imprisonment stuff he went through, all of that was to get him to the place that God wanted him to be. It was part of that vision that God had for him. And even though Joseph didn't see it, even though none of us saw it, God saw it. He saw the picture, right? He knew what was taking place. He knew what was going on. So I just want to encourage you that whatever you're going through, wherever you're at, it's part of God's vision. If you're seeking him first, now that if is important, because if you're not seeking him, then you can find yourself in a whole lot of places that God's not, and not where he wants you to be either. If you're seeking him and you're searching for his will in your life and you're being obedient to him, then your circumstances are where he wants you to be. He says, hey, you have heard the saying, the devil is in the details, but when it comes to dream stewardship, we need to understand that God is in the details. It means that God may give a dream, but we usually do not know the details and how the dream will be fulfilled. The devil's not in there. God is. God knows the details. He knows everything about it. He knows what's taking place. It says, should our assumptions about the journey toward our dream not match the path on which we find ourselves, we might begin to doubt God or question the vision. Before this happens, we should ask whether we are assuming too much and failing to let God be in charge of the details. If the details do not match your expectations, go back and re-examine your assumptions. God is still at work, but it may be in a way you would have never expected. Right? Sometimes we get that assumption of what our dream needs to look like and how it should play out. We kind of get the framework for how everything should take place in our life, but that's not always the case. And sometimes we just assume things, and God really has a plan, a different plan, and a different way it's going to happen than what we ever imagined. So this last part, he says, supporting your first chair's vision, even at times or in an area where you may not feel aligned with your dreams, you might not feel alignment between your dreams and those of your first chair, you still must play the role of supportive advisor. Proverbs 11:14 says, for the lack of guidance, a nation falls, but many advisors make victory sure. That your job, no matter what you feel like your dreams are, or if your dream is aligned with your senior pastor's dream, your job is still to be supportive of who your leader is at this time and in this moment. Potiphar's vision and dreams were not Joseph's dreams. They were not the same. I'm not saying your senior pastor's a Potiphar. I'm not saying that there's somebody who's living against the Lord, but Joseph and Potiphar had totally different dreams. Joseph didn't give up on his dream, but he also still supported his leader at that time. And that's our job. That's, as second chair, our job is still to get behind the vision that God's given to our senior pastor, because he is the leader at this time for that church. You continue to dream, but you get behind your pastor's dream. So the best second chair advisors are those who not only understand the purpose of the dream, but also assess how it is being communicated. Beyond communication, second chairs support the vision by rolling up their sleeves and working toward the end result. If the ministry you lead is not aligned with the vision, this sends a strong negative signal to the rest of the organization. If you're not behind your pastor and they can tell you're not working to support his vision and his dreams, then it's going to hurt the church. So make sure that what you're doing and the actions that you're taking are supporting your senior pastor and doing the things that he's called you to do, is they're supporting the dream and the vision that he has for that church. The last part, the very last chapter, is about leaving the second chair. Then when it's time to go, I'm just going to hit just a couple of things. First of all, he says it's a matter of timing. You may know that God is going to call you to leave, but is now the right time. In one sense, you may never seem to be in one sense there may never seem to be a right time. The church is at a critical juncture. Your kids are the wrong age for the move, or you're experiencing great results in your ministry. There are certainly factors to consider, but there is a faith factor as well. A wise minister at Western University said, "When it is right time for you, it is right for everyone. If the Lord is in it, He leads you away, then it will be right for everybody." That if you feel like it's time to leave your position, your second chair position, make sure, or if you're considering that, make sure it's the right time. Make sure it's God's timing, because if it is God's timing, then it'll be the best thing for you and the best thing for the church. But there are way too many people who leave when it's not God's timing. We leave because we get frustrated, we leave because we get mad, leave for any various reasons, maybe just something in life. Maybe we think it's a good reason that we're leaving, but if it's not God's timing and it's not what He wants, then it's not going to be good for the church. But if it is, then it will be okay. People will be okay. It's also not good to hang around too long if you feel like God's already called you to leave, because that doesn't help the church either. If you know that you've been called to leave and you're just hanging around because you're worried about how people will carry on without you, that, I can't leave such and such, I can't leave them hanging here, but you know that God's calling you away, you just got to trust that God's going to take care of those people. He's going to take care of that ministry if you do leave. You just be obedient to God. Make sure that it's His timing before you ever leave a position. Make sure it's Him calling you. He says one of the reasons you might stay too long is comfort. Some comfort with the known. Sometimes we just get comfortable where we are, and we don't want to leave that position. He calls out youth pastors in that position, which I take offense to. But no, he says youth pastors usually stay too long because they get comfortable with where they're at. Truth. Sometimes they get comfortable where they are. I think there's more of a turnover in youth pastors than there are too many staying too long. But he does call that out. He says ultimately the decision to leave is also a decision to be a good steward of your gifts. If you're in a position where you constantly are stymied in using the gifts God has given you, then it is impossible for you to be a good steward. Before you resign, however, distinguish between not fully using your gifts at this time and having little prospect for ever using your gifts. You may need to improve communication and exercise more patience. So what he says is that if you're not able to use the gifts that God's called you to, you know that your position isn't allowing you to do that. You're not getting the opportunity to use the giftings that God's placed in your life. Then are you really being a good steward of the gifts He's given you? And the answer is no. You're not being a good steward if you're not using those. And if you're not given that opportunity, then maybe that means you do need to move. But he says make sure that it's not just that you're not able to use them for that moment. There's a difference in not being able to use them for a certain amount of time, and then there's just no prospect of ever being able to. Make sure that it's God's timing. It all just goes down to Him making sure that it's the Lord. And the last thing he says is, first of all, leave as a better leader. That if you're feeling like you're leaving a position, and if you go in, he actually says that if you go into positions thinking about this, then it'll help you as you leave later on. That leave as a better leader, meaning that you grow while you're there. That you leave having grown from whatever experiences and whatever circumstances you go through. Make sure that it's changing you. Leave a legacy. Make sure that when you leave having developed other people. You leave having created. It's not for our glory. We leave a legacy so that people will remember us and say, "Oh man, they were the greatest thing that ever came through this church." And maybe they'll name a window plaque after us or whatever y'all name in y'all's churches. We got window cards named after people. And hymnals and everything else, but we don't leave a legacy so that we can have something named after us, but we leave a legacy so that people see that things were changed there, right? We leave a legacy of the Lord, that we leave it where we have developed leaders, and there's people in that church that are going to be able to pick up after we left and do what we were doing and do it better, because we've dedicated ourselves to helping them grow, not only ourselves, but pouring that out into other people. He says, don't set bridges ablaze. Don't burn bridges as you go. That's not leaving well. That's not leaving in the right way. Make sure you do everything you can to restore relationships as you exit a position. If that time ever comes, make sure that you leave in the right way. Man, most of the time, if people leave and it's under bad circumstances, everybody's mad and everybody's ready to throw somebody else under the bridge, and we're talking about each other. And I know that happens in the world, but we're the church. And there's got to be something different about us than the world. We got to be set apart from that. We got to be different than that. And part of that is in the way we leave. That's when the real true attitudes come out. It's easy to pretend your way through something and not be changed in your heart while you're there. But when you leave, you'll find the real attitude of somebody. And can we still represent Christ in those moments when we've been hurt and when somebody's done us wrong, or maybe things just didn't go right for us? Can we still leave in the right way? Can we still be godly people as we exit? And he says it's not easy to leave well, but it's important to do so whenever possible. If you maintain a long-term kingdom perspective, God's grace will be sufficient to guide you through the uncertainty. And that's how you leave well. You remember that it's about his kingdom and about his glory, right? That it's not about us. It's not about who we are and our perspective or how people see us. It's about how they see God and what they see us representing and how they see us representing him. So let me encourage you. I know that those paradoxes, those things are different for each of us. I know that each of us face those, and maybe one of them more than the other, but those are the things that we deal with and that you will deal with as you serve in a second chair role. And I just want to encourage you, if you haven't read the book all the way through yet, let me encourage you to go and read it. I just barely touched on just a little bit of the things through there. But he really does have a great insight into it. And it's something, I actually downloaded the audio, they have an audiobook version of it. And I've been listening to it a lot too, just because I feel like this hits me right where I'm at in my position. So it's been very helpful to me, and hopefully it'll be helpful to you as well. But again, anybody need those questions? Everybody get the questions down? Anybody need it again for the paper?
Got it.
What was the second one again?
Let me pull it back up real quick. Anybody got them written down as I flip back?
Yeah. What are the ultimate dreams of your ministry?
Yeah.
Okay.
And what do you long to see God do in and through your life? One of those two. Like I said, they're similar. They're about the same, I guess, but you can kind of.
Are we just choosing one of those, or are we doing both?
Yeah, just one. Just choose one of them.
Listen, there you go again.
Shut up, Chris. Scott. Are you kidding me? I'm a teacher. I have to clarify these things.
And like I said,
Scott,
personally, I think they're
Scott,
about the same. Yes, sir, Bishop.
Scott, I'm sorry.
That was an inside joke. She's always adding to our papers to make them longer. She's always asking questions to add on.
It's the teacher in me. I have to clarify these things. I'm telling you.
Every class,
Always gotta complicate stuff.
every class has that person that likes to make it harder for everybody else, don't they?
Yeah.
Just to be able to,
Yeah, do the first one again. I'm sorry.
I keep closing the book.
What do I long to see God do in and through my life?
Okay.
And then the other one was your ultimate dreams for your ministry. But like I said, I really think it's the same question, just asked two different ways. But if you want to take it from your ministry right now, if you feel like you're in the ministry that you're going to be operating in, where do you feel like God wants to take it? Or if you want to just say, if you want to take it from just in your dream, whatever dream God has placed on your life. That's really whatever you think will be more encouraging to you down the road, because I want it to be for your benefit anyway. I'm not. Y'all are sending them to Pastor Brent, so I'm gonna have to get them from him if I want to even be able to read them. But I want it to be something that would help you out later on. So, anybody have any other questions? Anything you want to add? Any comments?
Yeah, well, everybody's on here. I do want to add a comment. I just got a text a few minutes ago. One of our members, Carol Owens, I don't know if anybody knows her or not, but she was put on life support yesterday, and they taken her off life support today. So if I know that y'all represent a good many churches, so everybody be praying for that family, please.
Definitely. We're gonna pray before we leave. Anybody else have any other prayer requests before we close out? Everybody good?
I don't have a prayer request. I got a quick question though about the assignment. Whenever we're writing that paper, are we supposed to try to stay close to some sort of perspective that comes from the book?
Nope. I got to make up the question, so Pastor didn't tell me.
Okay.
So I just want it to be about your dream, just whatever.
I got you.
Whatever you want it to be. Yep. I feel like you got the book already. You can go back to it. I'd rather have, if I'm going to be writing something, I'd rather write something that's going to benefit me down the road. So I felt like, I try to pick something that I would want to have to write about. So you can use perspectives from the book if you want to, but really I just want it to be whatever dreams God placed on your heart, whatever vision he's showing you for your ministry. So anybody else got anything? Yep, good. All right, let's pray together before we go then. Lord Jesus, Father, we thank you, Lord, for your love and your mercy and your control over everything in this world, everything in our lives. Well, Father, we know that you've given us the free will to choose and make our decisions, but we also know, God, that the whole world is in your hands. And Lord, we are thankful today for that, Lord. We can find peace and contentment in knowing that knowing nothing is out of your control. Lord, I know that there's so much that's going on right now that's different and unique and scary, unknown. But Father, we're just looking at that zoomed in close picture, and you know the full details. Father, you know what it all looks like, and we just trust you. Help us to trust you, Lord. Father, I thank you for every one of these people today. God, I thank you for what they're doing in their lives, for how you're working in them and through them. God, as they're pursuing their calling that you placed on their hearts, so they pursue that dream. Father, I pray that you help them to learn to also be content where they're at. Help me to learn to be content where I'm at while also dreaming. Help us to have all of those paradoxes in our life, to help find balance amongst them. Father, as we serve you, as we work in ministry, Lord, I pray that you be with them and their families. I pray that you protect them, keep them safe. Lord, today we pray specifically for Miss Carol Owens. Lord, I pray that you just continue to bless her, Father, and her family. Father, we pray that you give her family peace today, that you comfort them, that you wrap them in your arms, Lord Jesus. We know that your Spirit is our comforter. And Holy Spirit, we ask that you be with them today. I know that there's nothing that we could do or we could say, but Father, you are able. And we trust that today. And we ask that you just be with this family in a mighty and a powerful way today. Lord, again, just be with everyone as they continue their studies, Lord, help them to work, continue to grow and learn together. Father, I pray that as they build this bond that they've built going through these classes, Father, that it'll be something that remains with them throughout their ministries, that they have people that they can look back on and they can talk to, and they can encourage one another, no matter what season they find themselves at in life. God, help them to know that they've got people there that are going through it with them. And Lord, I pray that you just be with us from this day forward as we go through this pandemic. God, just help us to trust you, rely on you, and know that you're in control, Lord. We love you. We praise you. We give you glory and honor and praise, Jesus. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.
Guys, appreciate y'all letting me be here today. Enjoyed it. And
Thanks, Scott.
no problem.
We
Thank you,
appreciate
Pastor.
Scott.
Thank you, Scott.
Listen, if y'all ever need anything,
You the man.
feel free to reach out to me at the conference office. Y'all want to write here. Look, do me a favor real quick before we go. Y'all write down my number if you don't already have it. It's 864-760-7028. 864-760-7028. Y'all call, text me anytime, any question, anything I can help out with at the church, anything you want to know about that I can help with. I don't know about everything, but if I can help with it, I will. I'll be happy to help any way I can. And I just know I'm praying for you guys, rooting for you, looking forward to what God's going to do in your ministries and what he's already doing, but what he's going to continue to do. So love you, praying for you. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Cut us off, man. Y'all have a great day. Hot outside now. Starting to sweat.